Imagine your life as a card game. There was this one particular game I played a lot as a kid called Yu-Gi-Oh! You start out with a hand of cards. They could either be monsters, spells, or traps, and every turn you lay them out on the field, and on the next turn you can attack your opponent with them. The goal of the game is for you and your opponent to keep drawing cards and playing them against each other until one of you wipes out the other's life points. It was a very dramatic affair and the height of my preteen years. Now here's where the magic comes in. The key to winning this game isn't about having the most powerful cards. Cards can create combos with each other. Even if you have a deck of mediocre cards, if you play the right combination, the effect is more powerful than the sum of its parts. It doesn't matter how many blue eyes white dragon they have left if you've already obliterated their life points. When I started my own game of life, I had a couple of Chinese cards in my hands. And frankly, they didn't serve me very well in America, especially in the social arena. Like many others, I tried to get rid of them and pick up new skills. I can't even tell you the number of hours I spent on YouTube studying Craig Ferguson. What is it about this man's features that make him so irresistible to women? Is it his nose? Do I need a plastic surgery? I can't say I ever found the answer to what I was looking for, but I did figure out what features Craig Ferguson lacked. He was probably not as docile, nor as nerdy, nor as quiet as your stereotypical Asian brother. Not all Asians are alike, but some of these traits are cultural artifacts of the way we were raised. I spent the first 10 years of my life in China, and the brethren I left behind quietly went on to propel the country to become the world's second largest economy, projected to surpass the United States in 2030. When we combine our abilities together, we succeed. In this video, I want to talk about 4 principles behind why Asians are so successful in America. The first principle is to channel unyielding commitment. According to a 2014 study by the National Academy of Sciences, the superior academic achievement of Asian Americans is a well-documented phenomenon that lacks a widely accepted explanation. We find that the Asian American educational advantage over whites is attributable mainly to Asian students exerting greater academic effort and not to advantages in tested cognitive abilities or socio-demographics. In simpler terms, we work harder, but hard work is a generic trait that anyone can embody. So what exactly makes Asians stand out in that regard? The answer to that question comes from the stories we grew up with. I grew up reading fables of the Long March, when Chairman Mao led a communist army 86,000 strong on a retreat to evade capture by the nationalists. 9,000 kilometers and 370 days later, only 8,000 people survived. And they went on to rebuild the Red Army, defeat the nationalists, and unite China under communist rule. These people were my heroes. They didn't have to be physically strong or mentally sharp. They simply had to be able to suffer for a long period of time. To win is to commit to suffering. Not every Asian can relate to the Long March, but countless versions of the same stories are told and retold throughout our 5,000-year-old history, where we sacrifice our well-being for a greater cause, whether that's work, family, or country. Western therapists might call this kind of behavior toxic, but it is nonetheless effective. Sometimes we end up getting what we want simply by outlasting everybody else. It's not the sexiest power, but when I encounter a difficult situation in life, I instinctively try to hold out for a little longer, try a little harder, and to remember the Long March. Moving on to our second principle, which is to embrace our academic tradition and seek education. The Chinese have always been nerds. In ancient times, we didn't have Jesus, but we had Confucius and a long line of old Asian men with long beards who spoke in riddles. At some point in our history, we fell behind technologically and we were effectively conquered by the Europeans. But in true Chinese spirit, we learned from our mistakes. We learned manufacturing so we can make iPhones for the world. We learned advanced mathematics so our brightest can qualify for the best Western universities. For immigration purposes, our learning used to be centered around a few highly technical careers. According to a 2012 survey by the Pew Research Center, recent Asian immigrants are also about 3 times as likely as recent immigrants from other parts of the world to receive their green cards on the basis of employer rather than family sponsorship. However, the world has become more complicated for the second generation. It turns out we don't want to be exactly like our parents. We're trying to branch out to become actors, entrepreneurs, musicians, but we face systemic racism in these uncharted territories. And how do we overcome that? Well, we lean into our ability to commit to suffering whatever prejudice comes our way, while acquiring all the knowledge that we can. We can learn art the same way that we learn math. I have a total of 5 mentors who coach me on business, career, and YouTube. They all take a very analytical approach with me where they try to break things down into atomic logic. Learning soft skills like conveying emotion has always been my crutch. I just don't know how to feel things out. I need my coaches to show me the technicalities behind every facial contortion, vocal intonation, and I need them to explain to me the right words to say at the right time. On top of that, I also have 2 therapists who help me cope with my anxiety and my relationships. Seems a little excessive to have a teacher for every area of your life. But we don't know what we don't know, and the only way for us to know better is to manifest our inner nerds and learn. This brings me to the 3rd principle, which is to adopt fast changes. China isn't exactly at the top of people's travel destinations. People would much rather visit Thailand, Korea, or Japan. For that reason, people don't really know what China is like. Given that it's still ruled by the Communist Party, it's reasonable to imagine that it's a third world country stuck in the 1990s. Unfortunately, that couldn't be further from the truth. China is defined by rapid change. It's true that millions were dying of famine in the 1960s, but by the 1980s, we were manufacturing everything in the world. And by the 2000s, we became the model minority in the US and beyond. It took Facebook 13 years to reach 1 billion users. It took China's WeChat only 7. China skipped the whole credit card fiasco and everyone went straight to paying for everything with their phones. My grandma was scanning QR codes and wearing face masks years before COVID even started. All this is to say, things happen rapidly in China. It's almost certainly destructive for the environment, loose regulations, questionable ethics, but we can't deny the spirit behind it. We all want a better tomorrow, and if the past isn't working, we're going to try something new. For Asians in America, this means we gravitate towards bleeding-edge careers. Despite being underrepresented in mainstream culture, we are actually overrepresented in fields like software engineering. This is a survey from Zipia.com showing Asians make up 34% of all software engineers, while we make up only 5.4% of the US population. For better or for worse, emerging technologies like Bitcoin and generative AI are spearheaded by lots of Asian minds. If Hollywood doesn't like our faces, we'll make our own Hollywood in the metaverse. As Matt Damon once said in his poorly timed commercial for Crypto.com, fortune favors the brave, and Asians are nothing if not brave. The last principle is to speak another language. English is great. There are approximately 1.5 billion English speakers in the world, which makes up about 20% of the world population. But that still leaves 6.5 billion people you can't communicate with. Asians, on the other hand, are largely bilingual. Being able to speak another person's language is the fastest way to build trust. And when you gain someone's trust, they will tell you things that you wouldn't hear otherwise. Asian Americans who choose to actively speak their second language end up with a more worldly perspective. And that opens up unique opportunities to bridge the gap between the East and the West. Everything Everywhere All at Once swept the Oscars. But remember, Asians only make up 5.4% of the US population, so it's not like we're just voting for ourselves. The stories that we tell are resonating with a larger audience. Our culture is no longer a gimmick. It is a deeply human experience that is finally getting translated by people like us. It's not just Hollywood. On the small screen, I see all these ramen and dumpling ads on Instagram. There are boba shops around every corner in LA. Hazy memories from my childhood are being recreated into the present. Our second languages link our past to our future. And we're so lucky to have this ability because learning a new language as an adult is damned near impossible. Here's the thing I'm really guilty of when it comes to language. Because my de facto language is English, even when I'm speaking with a non-native English speaker and they are clearly showing signs of preferring to speak in Chinese, sometimes I still feel awkward about it, so I end up forcing English onto the conversation. When I do that, I'm denying myself an opportunity for connection. My role is not to be an English teacher. I want to build trust so that we can learn from each other. I want to end with a quote from this new Netflix TV series called Beef. Western therapy doesn't work on Eastern minds. It's making memes online because it speaks a subconscious truth. The traits that we inherited from our cultural upbringings will always be a part of who we are. And these traits can at times be toxic and traumatic, but they can also drive unprecedented success. You don't get to pick the cards that you start with in life. But now that you know the powers that you wield, you get to pick the next move.